joining us at Christchurch Southport. My name is Tabs and I'm here to introduce you to the fourth episode of our current series here at CCS Online. A special welcome if you are new watching us today. We're a Church of England congregation at the heart of Southport with a heart for Southport. If you don't know us, that's our vision, and we join together here in a bunch of different ways to build community where we can each grow and seek the power of God to bring hope in relevant ways to today's society. We're about putting Jesus at the centre and seeing lives change, which is exactly what we've got planned for this week's episode. So in a sec, I want to invite you to take a moment to stop and to be still and to ready your heart and your mind to step further into God's presence, giving him praise with a psalm and praying that you would find the faith and hope to hear him speak to you today through this episode. Then when we're ready, we'll head over live to hear this week's message from our Sunday morning in-person gathering. We'll have some music from some of our worship team and here's some ways you can continue to connect with CCS. But before all that, here's a little bit more of who we are.
Verses 1 to 7 17 to 28, and 32 to 44. It can be found on page 1077 of the Church Bible and followed on the overhead projector. Verses 1 to 7. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Verses 17 to 18. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." Verses 32 to 44. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I know that's a long reading, but I cut out lots of it as well. So go home this afternoon and read the whole story. It's an amazing story. It's a mind-boggling story. It's also a really confusing story as well. There's bits in it you can think, what? Jesus was told that the person that he loved and the sisters that he loved was dying. He said, all right, well, I'll just stay here then for a bit longer. You think, what on earth is going on in this story? It's a strange but fantastic story. So take your time to read it, and hopefully some of the words that I'm going to say this morning will help you in your understanding. So we've been looking for the past few weeks at a series called Encounters with Jesus. Different people that encountered Jesus and what effect it had on them and what effect it can have on us. And today we're looking at the grieving sisters, Mary and Martha. You'll be pleased to hear that I've really only got 2 points that I want to put before you this morning. You know, which you might think could lead to a short sermon, wouldn't you? Just 2 points that I want to pull out from this. So, in our reading, you know, we're told that Jesus finds out that Lazarus is ill, but instead of going, he stays and does some more stuff, and then he goes to Bethany, because that's where they lived. And one of the reasons why we called our daughter Bethany, a place that Jesus loved. And as he arrives there, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days now, and Martha runs out to him and says these words, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Lord, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. And Jesus hears that. And when he hears that, he responds in a particular way. And the way he responds is with his, with his Godhead on. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And he goes on like that, and he gives a kind of theological response to Martha, but accurate and what was needed for Martha in that situation. Martha's saying to him, "Jesus, you came too late. Too late, he's dead." And Jesus dismisses the doubt and gives hope instead. He says, "With me, it's never too late. I'm here. Don't despair." And he points her to the heavens. In his book, Tim Keller, who this series we're basing on Encounters with Jesus, he says he uses the ministry of truth because it's what Martha needed. But then, a few minutes later, he encounters Mary. And Mary says exactly the same words as Martha. The other sister, who he loved just as much as Martha, runs out and says to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And how does he respond this time? It says in our reading, deeply moved in spirit and troubled, he just breaks down and cries. He just sobs. Keller says in his book, he's entering into her grief. It's the ministry of tears. It's what she needed. And just as a side here for you, for pub quiz people, we get the shortest verse in the Bible, John chapter 11, verse 35. In our reading, it came up. Did you notice it? Just the two words, Jesus wept. Really powerful. Really powerful. In that situation, Jesus wept. You see, Jesus was able to be strong when he needed to be strong, tender when he needed to be tender. And we will have natural instincts that push us one way or other. But we need to be able to be guided and realize what's needed in different situations. And we can look at Jesus as our example. Jesus is tenderness without weakness. He's strength without harshness. He's humility without lack of confidence. He's authority without arrogance. He's holiness without a shortage of inapproachability. He's power without insensitivity. He is God and he is human. And in this encounter, we see the two aspects of Jesus, God and humanity. And so the 2 points that I want to bring out of this story, and I want to challenge you about, I've really got 2 challenges for you this morning, is that Jesus of Nazareth, the Jesus that we read about, clearly claimed to be God. In John 5 and 18, he equates himself with God. In John 8:18, he uses the I am description of himself, which all the Jews would know is what God described himself in the Old Testament. I am who I am. In John 10:30, he says, the Father and I are one. In John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In John 20:28, Thomas says to him, you are my Lord and my God. And Jesus basically said, yep, you're right. Well done for realizing that. He doesn't go, no, you got it wrong. I'm just his servant. He says, yeah, I am your Lord and your God. Tim Keller says in his books, you have to deal with that claim. And he puts these words into the mouth of Jesus. You have to deal with my claims. If I am wrong, I am inferior to all these other founders of religions who have had the wisdom and the humility to not claim to be God. And if I'm right, I must be a superior way to find out who God is and what ultimately reality is. But I'm certainly not just equal to all others. So my first challenge to you this morning is, how do you view Jesus? Nicky Gumbel, who wrote the Alpha course, says this in the Alpha course. He's either a lunatic, a liar, or he is who he said he was. He is Lord. But we cannot say he was just a good guy. We cannot say he was just a good teacher, because Jesus never claimed that for himself. He said that he was Lord. So what do you think about that? Could he just be a liar? Could he be somebody who spent his 3.5 years lying? Was he a con man? Did he deceive the disciples? Were they sucked in by this con man? Did they end up dying? We understand all the disciples, on the base of a con man duped him. Is that what you think Jesus was? Do you think he was a con man? Or do you think he was a lunatic? Do you think he was just mentally deranged? He actually thought he was God. He wasn't, but he thought he was. He was just deluded. Do you think he was a lunatic? Had aspirations above his station, and in doing that managed to convince the followers that he actually was God? Or do you think that he was Lord? He was who he said he was. I want to challenge you and encourage you again this morning that it's not acceptable to come to the conclusion he was just a good guy who said good things, because that's not one of the options that Jesus leaves us. But the other aspect of this story, my other challenge for you this morning, is in my mind even harder to get my head round. Because the other part of this story is that Jesus lived his life on earth as a human. If he wasn't fully human, if he knew all things at all time, then I don't really like the guy very much in this story. Imagine, and I'm going to expand on this, so don't throw stones at me too early on. Imagine if he was still omniscient at that point in time, that he knew everything. So he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And Mary comes to him, sobbing and weeping. And instead of saying to Mary, "Mary, it's okay, I'm going to raise him from the dead in 5 minutes, don't worry about it," he cries. Why is he crying? Why is he upset? When he knows what he said, don't that, mate, just watch this. But he doesn't do that. In our story, we understand from the words of the story that he spoke to God and said, "God, can you sort this?" And he says, "Thanks for hearing me, God." And he says, "I've said that out loud, God, for everybody else. I knew you were going to hear me." But he chatted to God and he says, "Thanks, God." Jesus didn't know what was going to happen in the future because he was living as a human being. Jesus lived his life as a human. In Matthew 24, verse 36, Jesus says these words, "No one knows the days or hours when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself." That's Jesus. Only the Father knows. So he says, I don't know when these things are going to happen. Only God the Father knows. Because the Bible tells us that he laid aside that aspect. He was God, but he laid aside his majestic powers. We're told in John chapter 6 that he had a will like us. We're told in Luke chapter 2 that he had a mind. Chapter 2 and verse 52. And I went to see Martin at the back before the first service to just check my theology was right with Martin. I always do that because Martin is the church theologian, as he says he isn't, to be honest. And I said, it says that Jesus grew in wisdom. How could Jesus grow in wisdom? Did Jesus not know everything? How could Jesus become more wise? Can God become more wise? Is God not as wise as it becomes? But Jesus grew more wise. Why was that? Because he was a human. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, we're told that he marveled. He was astonished. Something happened and Jesus said, "That astonishes me. That surprises me. Isn't that amazing?" Well, we do that when it's a surprise because we didn't know what was going to happen. In Matthew 26:38, we're told he was sorrowful. In John 12:27, we're told he was troubled. Paul in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 17 says, he was made like us in every way. Jesus was made like us in every way. So ask yourself this morning, are you omniscient? Are you omnipotent? If you don't understand these words, look them up. Yeah, develop yourself. Are you all-knowing? Are you all-powerful? Do you know everything? Well, Jesus was made like us in every way. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 says, he was tempted like us in every way. The gospel shows that Jesus was a man who was born, who aged, and he died. He was a human. He got hungry. He got thirsty. Now, the early church had to struggle with this and try and work all this out. And when they did, they put together something which they called the hypostatic union. Sounds exciting, that. Remember that, you can sound intelligent. The hypostatic union. And this is what they said. They said Jesus Christ is having two natures, a divine nature and a human nature, yet being one person. Christ unites in himself uniquely and in an unrepeatable way this union of the human and the divine. The Westminster Shorter Catechism, which I'm sure you read most weeks of your life, but if you dig into it, this is how they summarize this situation. Christ, the Son of God, became man by taking to himself a true body and a reasonable soul. I don't quite know what a reasonable soul's about there. Not a good soul, just a reasonable soul. You see, in John's letters to the church, John argues against the doubters, the Gnostics, who didn't believe that Christ was truly human. So here's the second challenge for you this morning. Jesus did everything that he did on earth without his godly powers. I'll say that again. Jesus did everything that he did on earth without his godly powers. He did them as a man. He raised Lazarus from the dead as a man who communicated with his Father and used his power. That's why he cried. He cried because his best mate had died and he was upset. But then he spoke to God and he raised him from the dead. He wasn't, like Hercules, if you know your Greek mythology. He wasn't a god in a human body that could do super powerful things of himself. The supernatural things he did because God walked through him. In Philippians chapter 2 and verse 6, it's pretty clear that he gave up his divine power. That's what it says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 and 8. Jesus says himself in John chapter 5, verses 19 to 30, the Son can do nothing of himself. That is pretty clear. He says later on in that, I can of myself do nothing. Which is really, really powerful. Let me read you to what Jesus says in John chapter 14. I'm making this point deliberately by referring to lots of verses of the Bible because it's a really challenging point. And Jesus says this in John 14. He says, don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you are not just my own. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. That is how we describe ourselves all the time. The Holy Spirit living in us. God's power living in us allows us to do the stuff for God that we do. And that's exactly how Jesus describes himself. Hebrews 2 verse 7 to 9 says he was made a little lower than the angels. So he's like us, with our limitations. If he wasn't like us, then what's Paul talking about when Paul encourages us to follow Paul's example as he follows Christ's example? But he was fully human. And therefore, the miracles he did as a man. He walked on water as a man, like Peter did, and like somebody else I know has done as well. As a man, through God's power. He healed as a man. He raised from the dead as a man, just like Paul did in Acts, and others have done throughout church history. He empathized with people as a man. He got it right all the time as a human being. He resisted temptation as a man. If Christ resisted temptation because he was God powers, I'll just ignore it. I can't do that. Is God doing that? If Christ raised people from the dead as God, well, what's that got to do with me? I can't do that. If Christ raises people, heals people as God, nothing to do with me. I can't get involved in that. He didn't. He did it as a man. So this is a challenge if you call yourself a Christian, but it also gives us hope. The hope for you, if you call yourself a Christian, is you can be different. Say, well, this is just me. There is hope that things can change. We have Jesus as an example. He is our example. We are told to be imitators of Christ. And that wasn't sarcasm. As it would be if we were told to, be like God. No. Be imitators of Christ. So my challenge for you today, if you call yourself a Christian, is to remain positive. Remain hopeful. Aim to use the Holy Spirit within you to enable you to live the life that you're called to live, to represent Jesus, to represent the way as you live your life on earth. So 2 challenges this morning. One challenge is, how do you view Jesus? Lord, lunatic, liar. And the second challenge is, how are you going to represent Jesus, the fully human example for us? Thank you. I'm just going to pray, and as I pray, Hetty's going to lead us. Lord, I just pray this morning that we can be inspired and excited and enthused.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last. word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. Oh, my heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. 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 Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. Still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet, and I never will forget. You've never failed me yet, and I never will forget.
Amazing. I hope you've been able to find space to hear God, speak to you through our fourth episode of the series. If you want to journey deeper into this week's message and allow it to shape and grow your faith even more so, we've got some questions to accompany the episode, which you can find in the description or the comments. I'd encourage you to find someone to reflect together with too, or even in community, growing in faith together, supporting and challenging one another in mission and listening to God's Holy Spirit. Get in touch if anything has spoken to you in this episode. You can do that either through the CCS office or even the YouTube comments if you feel comfortable. And if you want to stay connected, there's loads of ways to get involved with what's happening amongst the CCS family. You might want to connect with one of our missional communities, blessing the Southport community. Again, just contact the office. Or if you want to keep on top of all our news, you can sign up for our weekly email, or check out this week's CCS news in the episode description or our social media channels. Speaking of which, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you never miss an episode of CCS Online. And you can even click the like button so YouTube knows our episodes are worth sharing with others. Hope you join us again in our next episode, and I pray that you have a really blessed week.